Greetings, business human. It's me, your friendliest friend at the Small Business Office of Labor and Industries. Small Biz Andrew, here with some small biz wisdom to keep your small business in the know. Today's troublesome topic to tackle, independent contractors. Now, independent contractor is not a phrase that makes us burst into song at L&I, and that's because more times than not, it's loaded with confusion. And those people you're calling independent contractors are actually covered workers by definition of the state and for the purpose of workers' compensation. It's not as simple as giving someone a 1099 and calling them a contractor. So what does that mean for you? It means that if you really have a covered worker, you also have legal responsibilities as an employer, like record keeping, paying workers' comp premiums, and following state employment laws. Identifying the differences between covered workers and true independent contractors remains elusive for many businesses. So let's spend some time diving into the mysteries and wonders of independent contractors, from how we define them to the resources we have available to keep your business working wise. It's crucial to understand a few things. As I mentioned before, a 1099 form is not enough. 1099s are federal forms, and they have no bearing on Washington workers' comp coverage. A person might be considered an independent contractor by the IRS for federal tax purposes, but that does not mean the state defines them as one. Moreover, a person might meet both the federal and state definition of an independent contractor for one contract, but that doesn't mean they will on another contract. So the designation can be contract specific and needs to be evaluated separately. The bottom line is this: it doesn't matter what you call that person. You can call them an independent contractor. You can believe in your heart and soul that they're an independent contractor. Heck, you can even gift them a really nice coffee mug with "World's Most Legitimate Independent Contractor" written across it. None of that's going to make them a true independent contractor in Washington unless they meet the criteria of one of these two tests: the personal labor test or the 6-part test, which technically becomes a 7-part test if you're in construction. Let's say we put our hypothetical contractors to the test. For our first test, let's look at those individuals who are bringing more than their personal labor to the equation. To pass what we call the personal labor test, one of the following two things must be true. And it should be noted that for either of these examples to pass the test, a key component is that you cannot exert any direction or control over that individual or their employees. So an individual would pass the test if they bring their own employees to perform the work, or the individual brings heavy or costly specialized equipment with them that requires their expertise to operate it. Please note that it says costly specialized equipment. A pickup truck or a lawnmower isn't going to fit that description, but something like an MRI or an ultrasound machine, or maybe some large earth moving equipment would. Think of it this way: does fulfilling the job require costly equipment and the expertise to operate it? If not, then it probably isn't meeting the criteria for specialized equipment. Now, if neither of these statements are true for that worker, then we have to subject our hypothetical individual to the rigors of the 6-part test. I've noticed that when all 6 criteria are listed in their entirety on one slide, audiences tend to undergo this magical transformation where eyes achieve advanced levels of vacancy and glassiness. So to save your brain from this numbing side effect, why don't we look at the 6-part test in more manageable pairs? What's crucial to know about the 6-part test is that every single one of these statements must be true. If anything in these next 3 slides isn't true, then that person is not an independent contractor. Number 1 on our test may sound simple, but it can have a lot of nuance. It boils down to this: are they an independently established and registered business working free from your direction or control? This is really where the independent part of independent contractor comes into play, because that's what we're trying to gauge with this question. Are they working independently of you, your business, and your staff? Or are you giving them training or equipment, directing them in the sequence of work, how it's done, or who can perform it? Number 2 on our list is all about ensuring that the business is different and separate from your own. And this can be met in one of 3 different ways. Is the service outside the usual course of business? Or in other words, is the contractor doing something different from what you do in your business? Is the service being performed outside of all places of business? Or in other words, is the contractor performing their work away from where you perform yours? And lastly, is the individual responsible for paying the costs of the principal place of business where that service is being performed? So if we're to summarize our first pair of test criteria, we're looking at whether the individual is free from your control and whether the services are either different or being performed elsewhere. On to the next pair. Number 3 uses a lot of words to basically ask this: does the individual have an existing and established business before you brought them in? Or do they have a principal place of business that would qualify for that IRS business deduction, the evidence of which you will want them to demonstrate? The fourth part of the test is all about ensuring the individual is filing business tax returns with the IRS for the business activity you're engaging them for. The fifth element is to ensure that the individual is a fully licensed business in the state of Washington, which requires that they've established an account with the Department of Revenue. I've spoken to hundreds of employers over the years asking about whether a person meets the independent contractor test, and I found this is one of the easiest first ways to tell. If that person you bring on doesn't have their own business license in Washington, well, then they don't meet the test. The final part of the test is to ensure that a separate set of books and records are maintained, which reflect all the income and expenses of the business. So to simplify this into a brief summary, if your contractor isn't providing additional workers of their own or major specialized equipment, they may be a covered worker if any of the conditions of the 6-part test listed here are not met. Are they free from your direction and control, which can be categorized as behavioral, financial, and contractual? Are they in business for themselves? Do they have all required business licenses? Do they pay state and federal business taxes? Do they have multiple clients? And do they maintain their own books and records? Now, you may recall that sometimes that 6-part test can have a 7th member join the band, and that's if construction is involved. If so, the individual also has to be a properly registered contractor with proof of their contractor registration from the Department of Labor and Industries. Such information is publicly available by utilizing our Verify tool on our website homepage. For those of you whose own business requires contractor registration, and you've brought on a subcontractor to perform work for you, I strongly urge you to check out the publication I've listed here on how to avoid liability for your subcontractors' unpaid workers' comp premiums, because there's a thing in Washington called prime contractor liability, which means that you, as a prime contractor, could be held liable for any workers' compensation premiums your subcontractors didn't pay to cover their employees while performing the work for you. And speaking of protecting yourself, whatever line of business you're in, you want to keep accurate records, as the importance of good record keeping cannot be stressed enough. Not only will keeping accurate records save you time and money in the long run, these records are also required by law, as they're needed to accurately track hours and wages for proper reporting. But why am I mentioning this here? Because it's also wise to keep information about any independent contractors you might have used. Even though you won't be reporting the hours of any true independent contractors in your workers' comp quarterly filings, this information is crucial for any audits that might occur, because auditors may look at any independent contractor relationships to ensure that they met that 6-part test. All records should be kept for a minimum of 3 years, plus the year to date for workers' comp purposes. If you're still feeling a little confused or uncertain about independent contractors, you're not alone. It remains one of the most common points of inquiry at our agency, and for good reason. It's confusing. The nice part is there are a variety of free resources available to help you when you're not sure about the status of someone performing work for you. Head on over to lni.wa.gov/independent contractor to get started. We have an e-learning class available and the very helpful Independent Contractor Guide, which goes over the test in detail and provides several examples. You can call our employer services line at 360-902-4817 for assistance, or if you've gone over the test and still feel like that individual working for you falls within a gray area on a thing or two, you can utilize the services of our determinations unit to have a specialist at L&I look at your particular scenario and make a determination on whether that person is a covered worker or not. One last resource I'm going to shamelessly plug is myself and the heroic band of liaisons at the Small Business Office of Labor and Industries. Call or email us when you have questions. We're ready and happy to help make doing business in Washington easier for you. Thank you.